There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe you. It doesn't bring peace. It screams through your bones in the middle of the night and makes you question everything. The kind of silence where you pray, but the heavens feel sealed. You cry out, and nothing answers back, not even an echo. And that's where most people break. Not because they're weak, but because they were taught that silence means abandonment, that stillness means rejection, that if God really saw them, really cared, He would have already shown up by now. But that's not how chosen souls are formed. You're not being ignored. You're being forged. You're being pulled into the kind of space no one warns you about, the sacred void where heaven speaks through what feels like absence. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with instruction. It strips you of everything that made you feel safe, your routines, your relationship, your distraction. And then it waits, not to torture you, but to prepare you. Every prophet went through it. Every warrior of light was dropped into darkness before their first victory. Moses was silenced for 40 years in the desert, not for punishment, but preparation. David was anointed king and then sent back to the field, forgotten by men, remembered by God. Even Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, where the silence was so loud that only temptation echoed. We mistake God's silence for His absence. But what if it's the opposite? What if silence is where He comes closest, so close that He no longer needs to shout? Think of it like a blacksmith's chamber. Before a blade can cut, it must be hidden, heated, beaten, drenched in ice, again and again, until it becomes deadly and silent. That's what's happening to you. You're not invisible. You're in incubation. And every unanswered prayer, every delay, every door that slammed in your face wasn't divine neglect. It was divine calibration, because you asked to be strong. You asked to be awakened. You asked to be used. But you thought that meant more light, more signs, more certainty. What you didn't realize is that light doesn't teach you how to see. Darkness does. When everything's stripped away and the only thing left is your soul, shivering, breaking, desperate, that's when you finally hear God whisper without words. And the whisper says, "Not yet. You're still in the fire. You're still being purged of the parts of you that begged for validation, of the ego that wanted applause instead of alignment, of the child within you who still needs to be seen to believe they matter." The silence is not ignoring that child. It's disciplining it with love. There's something radical happening beneath your pain. You don't see it yet, but your name is being written where no eyes can read it. You're being marked in realms that don't have clocks. And that's why everything feels out of sync, because you're no longer living by the rhythm of this world. You're being rewired to move by revelation. Most people will run from this season. They'll try to force noise into it, force solutions, force validation, force movement. But you're being asked to sit with the silence until it teaches you something no mentor, no book, no preacher could ever teach. And when it finally breaks, you won't just speak with power, you'll become the power. There's something eerie about transformation that no one talks about. It doesn't arrive with firework. It doesn't announce itself with clarity or peace. It comes quietly. It comes in disguise. And most of the time, it looks like everything is falling apart. You begin to question if the silence was ever holy, or if you've just been forgotten. But what you're really confronting isn't divine abandonment. It's the death of your former self. The silence isn't punishing you. It's confronting your illusion. When we say we want to grow, we rarely understand what that means. We imagine wisdom descending gently, like sunlight through a stained glass window. But real growth is violent. It tears, it burns, it unearths, and above all, it silences everything you thought you knew. This is where the ego starts to panic. Because without the noise, without the identity you used to wear like armor, you begin to see what's really been driving you. And often, it's fear. Fear of being unseen. Fear of being wrong. Fear of never being enough. That's why silence is so terrifying. It strips away your distractions and forces you into a room with your shadows, not to shame you, but to show you what's still in charge. This is the sacred chamber where warriors are built. You begin to notice that your prayers sound different now. You don't ask for comfort anymore. You ask for clarity. You don't beg for success. You beg for truth. You stop looking for the easy way out and start searching for meaning, even if it hurts. That's when you realize the silence didn't steal your voice. It changed your vocabulary. And what emerges from that silence is not a desperate cry for help, but a quiet, grounded knowing that you can't unlearn. Think of the caterpillar inside the cocoon. When it enters, it doesn't grow wings in stages. It dissolves fully, completely. It becomes unrecognizable goo, no shape, no structure, no identity. It has to lose everything it was in order to become what it's meant to be. And the tragic part? If someone tries to help, it breaks free too early. If someone tears open the cocoon out of love, it dies. Because the struggle was the design. That's what this silence is doing to you. You are being melted down to essence, to soul, to what was always eternal beneath all the masks. And it's not just for you. This is how spiritual warriors are born. Through storms no one sees, through nights so long, you forget how mornings feel. But when you rise, and you will rise, you'll carry a silence that shakes rooms, a presence that demands no explanation, a peace that doesn't beg to be understood, because you'll finally know what grows in silence doesn't need permission to exist. That's why they won't understand your new energy. That's why people who once felt superior to you will start to feel uneasy, not because you became arrogant, but because you became still. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped needing applause. You no longer beg for tables you've outgrown, and they can feel it. They can feel that something shifted, that the same person they underestimated is no longer available for old game. You didn't become colder, you became clear. And clarity to the insecure looks like threat. Stillness to the manipulative feels like rebellion. Your silence is now your revolution, not because it's empty, but because it's full of everything they never expected you to carry: self-respect, discernment, divine timing. And in a world addicted to noise, that kind of power is unsettling. You're not loud, but you're dangerous, because now you don't need to prove anything. The thunder they feared is already inside you. There's a moment, quiet, subtle, but seismic, when you realize you're no longer trying to be understood. And it's not because you've given up. It's because you've outgrown the need to explain your becoming to people still addicted to your former version. That moment is sacred, because it marks the beginning of a life that is finally yours. This is where true authority begins, in the silence of self-recognition. Before, you lived in reaction. Your emotions were shaped by the approval or rejection of others. Your identity was a collage of borrowed expectation. You said yes to things that made your soul shrink because you feared what would happen if you said no. And even in your loudest moments, you felt invisible. Because deep down, your voice wasn't yours. It was a performance scripted by survival. But now, the script is burning, and you're not mourning it. You're watching it dissolve with a strange sense of relief. There's a myth we're sold about healing, that it's gentle, that it's soft, that it feels like light. But sometimes, healing looks like distance, like canceling plans and not explaining why, like sitting in the quiet of your own chaos and choosing not to escape it this time, like becoming the villain in someone else's story, just so you can become the hero in your own. That's not selfishness, that's reclamation. And people will talk. They'll say you changed. They'll say you're cold. They'll say you lost your spark. But what they really mean is, they can no longer access the parts of you that used to tolerate their dysfunction. Your silence exposes their noise. Your boundaries reveal their control. Your peace feels like punishment to the chaotic. But that's not your burden anymore. You've been carrying too many ghosts. Apologies you never owed. Roles you never chose. Guilt that doesn't belong to you. And all of it, every layer, has been whispering the same thing. Let me go. And now, you're finally listening. You're starting to notice things others don't. The way some people only reach out when they need something. The way certain rooms drain you before you even walk in. The way your body tenses when you say yes to something your soul clearly said no to. These aren't random feelings. These are instruction. Your nervous system is becoming sacred ground. And anything that disrupts its peace, no matter how familiar, has to go. Because when you finally stop performing peace and start living it, the world starts to shift. You stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What do I need to stay whole?" You stop shrinking to fit places that celebrate your silence but fear your truth. You begin to recognize that not everyone deserves access to the softest parts of you, that your vulnerability is sacred, not public property. And that realization is not arrogant, it's necessary. This is why your silence now feels loud to them. Not because you're trying to intimidate, but because for the first time, you are not negotiating your worth. And in a world built on noise, your refusal to perform becomes a mirror, one that reflects the hollowness of those still faking it. They underestimated you because they confused your kindness with weakness. But you were never weak. You were holding back. You were protecting your softness until you learned how to wield it like a blade. And now that you know how sharp you are, you don't swing wildly. You walk into rooms like you belong there. Not because they said you do, but because you've stopped asking. You don't chase closure. You don't explain absence. You've learned that silence is a full sentence, that leaving isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a slow withdrawal of your energy from anything that no longer deserves it. And that withdrawal, it terrifies them. Because people who once fed off your self-doubt now have to face themselves. Without your light to distract them, they're left with their own shadow, and shadows don't lie. Meanwhile, you're not seeking revenge. You're not plotting a comeback. You're resting, rebuilding, reinventing. And in that stillness, you're becoming untouchable. Not because you're unreachable, but because you're finally aligned. And that's the kind of power no one can take. The most powerful transformation isn't the one you show off. It's the one no one sees coming. You're not posting about it. You're not explaining it. You're not rushing to prove you've healed. And that is exactly why it's working. This phase, this quiet, unglamorous, invisible phase, is where the real magic happens. Not in the breakthrough, but in the discipline. Not in the revelation, but in the refusal. Not in the applause, but in the silence of becoming someone you no longer need to announce. People don't realize that disappearing isn't always a sign of collapse. Sometimes it's the first act of spiritual rebellion, a sacred protest against everything that once diluted your essence. You stopped responding to every comment. You pulled back from conversations that led nowhere. You let unanswered messages sit because you realized you were always the one carrying the emotional labor. And for the first time, you gave yourself permission to not be available. This is not neglect. This is correction. The energy you used to spend fixing, explaining, rescuing, it's being rerouted back to you, into your own body, your own dreams, your own healing. And that shift isn't subtle. It changes the entire frequency of your existence. You walk slower, but with more purpose. You speak less, but your words land deeper. You smile differently, not to please, but because you're no longer faking peace for the comfort of others. And that energy is unsettling to people who still depend on your uncertainty. They try to pull you back with old tactics: guilt, obligation, passive aggression disguised as concern. But none of it sticks anymore, because the version of you they were trying to reach doesn't live there anymore. And you're not sending a forwarding address. This inner elevation is happening in real time. You're no longer chasing validation from people who only ever loved the watered-down version of you. You're no longer breaking yourself into pieces to be digestible. You're becoming whole, dangerously whole. And that wholeness radiates in silence. Because silence is misunderstood. People assume it's weakness, absence, retreat. But in reality, silence is your most strategic move. It's where you regroup, where you remember, where you reclaim. The battlefield may have gone quiet, but the warrior is sharpening their blade. Your silence is not empty. It's full of decisions that don't need to be explained, of boundaries that don't need to be debated, of healing that doesn't ask for permission to exist. You've stopped arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you. You've stopped attending emotional auctions where your worth was up for bidding. You've stopped trying to fix relationships that only survived because you were the glue. And now you're learning how to build without needing to hold everything together. This isn't about bitterness. This is about clarity. You finally see who checks in only when they need you, who vanishes the moment your light isn't convenient, who confuses proximity with loyalty. And instead of confronting them, you simply walk away. You walk into silence, not as a victim, but as a sovereign being reclaiming their peace. And something strange happens. You begin to attract a different frequency. People who don't flinch at your power. People who don't need to be convinced of your worth. People who recognize your silence not as absence, but as present, a deeper kind. Because now you don't just enter rooms, you shift them. You sit down and people sense it. You say little and it echoes. Your presence has become weighty. Not because you're trying to impress, but because you've stopped pretending. This is the metamorphosis that leaves people speechless, not because they don't know what to say, but because they never thought you'd outgrow the cage they built for you. And the beauty? You never even needed to scream, you just became. There's a moment in the transformation where the silence doesn't just become comfortable, it becomes sacred. You stop needing to be understood. You stop needing to be seen in the way you once begged for, because you realized the ones who misjudged your silence were never capable of understanding your roar. They didn't fear you when you were loud. They fear you now because you're not saying anything at all. And that's what's truly unsettling. You've entered a space where your power no longer needs to be demonstrated. You no longer speak to convince. You no longer move to prove. You exist with such anchored presence that your energy alone tells the story. This is the final stage of the evolution, the quiet dominance of someone who no longer needs to fight to be heard, because now your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. This is when the people who underestimated you begin to panic, not because you attacked them, not because you confronted them, but because you didn't. You walked away without a show, without a speech, without a warning. And that silence, that's what haunts them. Because now they have to sit with what they did. With the version of you they thought would never leave. With the version of you they assumed would always explain, always forgive, always come back. But you're gone. And what's terrifying isn't that you disappeared. It's that you're flourishing where they can't see you anymore. Because here's the truth most never understand. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one yelling. It's the one who realized they don't have to. It's the one who endured betrayal without becoming bitter, who faced disrespect without lowering their standard, who learned to let the storm pass without ever opening their mouth. That's the person who truly terrifies those who tried to break them, because they survived, and they did it without making a sound. You've now stepped into a different kind of energy, one that doesn't chase, one that doesn't beg, one that doesn't shrink itself to be digestible. You carry an authority that can't be taught. It was born from pain, forged in silence, and refined by every moment you chose your peace over your pride. And the irony? Now that you don't need to prove anything, everything you do becomes proof. The way you hold yourself, the way you enter a room, the way you protect your energy like it's sacred ground, because now it is. You know the cost of letting the wrong people in. You know what it feels like to have your kindness mistaken for weakness. And now, your silence is the lock on the door they no longer have a key to. There is freedom in that, not the kind that looks glamorous on the surface, but the kind that feels like breathing again after years of drowning in the expectations of others. The kind that feels like waking up without guilt, like being alone without feeling lonely, like realizing that you were never too much. They were simply not enough to hold what you carried. Now, you are not seeking validation. You are walking proof that survival is an art, that elegance and rage can coexist, that resilience wears the face of someone who has cried quietly and rebuilt silently, over and over again. And this time, you're not announcing your comeback. You're just rising. There's nothing more disarming to those who underestimated you than your refusal to explain. Your silence is no longer just a retreat. It's a revolution, a quiet, soul-deep statement. I owe you nothing, and I'm still everything you thought I couldn't be. This is where the story ends for them and begins for you. You've said all that needed to be said, without a word. You've become the kind of powerful they never saw coming.